So, what was the question again? What do you think of the situation with capitalist spaces and the society wanting to reclaim these spaces back in the context of post-socialist countries?
Well, I really can't speak to that since I don't know the situation. And obviously one of the key things one needs to know is what the political subjectivity is, what the political thinking is of the people you are talking with. For example, in this country, you have to get used to the idea that people really think of home ownership as part of the American dream. They've been sold this idea since the 1930s, when it was said, very interestingly, that working class people don't go on strike if they are debt encumbered homeowners. So home ownership was extended to the working class as a social control measure, as well as trying to bring the working class into the American dream.
Okay.
And since then, now everybody's convinced that they're nobody unless they're a homeowner. And we've seen now millions of people who've lost their homes, who've lost all their savings because of the way in which capitalism sold them this dream and then destroyed it. So I'm sure that if you went through a similar process in Czech Republic or Hungary or wherever, that people would suddenly say, I don't think capitalism really works very well. Now, I don't know exactly what the situation is in those countries. I mean, I read the press and I have some ideas. You had 20 years of kind of sort of capitalist, sometimes neoliberal policies.
Yeah.
And typically they produce a very wealthy strata in society, and the rest of the population is generally not well served at all. They lose their rights rather than gaining them. And then at some point or other, people say, this is not what I bargained for when we switch from, say, communism to capitalism. And then they will say, we need another system. We don't necessarily want the old one back, but we want a more socially just, environmentally sensitive kind of way of living.
Okay. Well, yeah, I actually think that the problem is in the Czech Republic, people sort of also believe in this American dream, more so that they couldn't have it for so long.
Right.
So I really don't know what the situation will be like in the next few years, especially that economic crisis hasn't arrived in its full extent yet. I think, do you have any theory on the way economic crisis spreads over the world?
Well, it's very interesting to try to keep track of how the economic crisis is spreading and in what ways. And it's spread in different countries in different ways. In some cases, some situations, hardly any impact at all. In other situations, serious impacts on export industries, but that's all. In other situations, it's the banks that have problems. So it's very hard, again, I think it's very hard to predict. I mean, for example, the impact of the crisis in Britain was completely different from the impact in Germany. In Germany, it's mainly the export industries that suffered. And then after that, there began to be some problems with the banking system. In Britain, it was more like the United States. It was the housing problem that really triggered everything. So in different parts of the world, the crisis is working its way through in very different ways. I mean, one of the other ways, which is very important in poor countries, is that the flow of remittances. I mean, for example, in the United States, there are a lot of people from Mexico who send their money back to Mexico. Yesterday there was an article in the New York Times that said now poor people in Mexico are actually sending money to the United States to try to support their children who are unemployed in the United States. So but then the effect in Mexico is terrible in terms of the fall off of remittances. Many people are going hungry for that reason in Mexico, Haiti, many people who've lost their jobs in the Gulf states don't send remittances back to India anymore, so you will find impoverishment in India because of that. So each place has a different way in which it may experience the crisis, and then there's a different political response in each place, depending upon what the cause of the crisis seems to be, and how people are thinking about politics anyway.
Okay. Well, I read an article about the comeback of American consumerism during my flights to New York. It was on-board magazine, and they were questioning in this article what should the new American consumer look like, and it seemed to me from that article that they didn't really have a very good solution to that. They said, well, the world's economy was so dependent on American consumption that it wasn't even funny. Like nobody didn't even realize the extent of I mean, like how much the whole world was dependent on it. So. What do you think will happen with?
Well, we're getting very different stories right now. On a Thursday, we hear that the American consumer is back and they're beginning to consume again. On the following Monday, we hear that they're not back because unemployment is rising, and so we're getting very different stories actually. But you have to always remember that an economy like the United States operates very much on expectations, and it operates very much on confidence, so that the business press is constantly trying to tell you everything's getting better,
Yeah.
And the government is always trying to tell you that things are getting better, we've turned the corner, things aren't as bad as they were, and you get some data that suggests they're not, and then
but it's all finance-based, like...
a lot of it is finance-based, a lot of it is fictitious.
Yeah.
So it's very hard to actually figure out what the real situation is.
Yeah.
What we do know is that in the past, American indebtedness has been an incredible, powerful engine of global growth. And American indebtedness has stopped.
Yeah.
And it's some ways reversing, so that probably we are going to go into a new international order where new forms of demand are going to have to be generated, such as are being generated in China by these big sort of infrastructural investments in highways and new road systems and dams and all those kinds of things. So Chinese are doing it in a very different way.
All right. Okay. So thank you very much for your opinions.
Okay.